pleasure to welcome to the platform our last speaker. Invite you to show your appreciation in the normal way, Fintan Donahue, who's Chief Executive of Herts College. Fintan.
Good morning, colleagues. I'd like to really open this governance session by recognising some of the things that have been said on the panel, that this is not a one-size-fits-all, that we all have different aspirations for our college, and my focus is very much on the entrepreneurial focus and on the nature of risk-taking and the changes that I believe many of us are going to have to embrace if we're to add real value to our communities. And in doing that, I start by saying that for those of us in a group of colleges known as the Gazelle Colleges Group, we are very much trying to focus on whether our role and the role of our boards and the role of our colleges are significantly more than the provision of qualifications, but are actually much more about building wealth and opportunity and resourcing in our organisations. And if that's the case, then the education, character setting and strategic direction role, which under the Carver principles or any others sits within the governing body, I think are going to come under some very significant scrutiny if that's the direction of travel that we as colleges are taking on. Because I think the challenge to all of us in colleges is, what is the real impact we are making on our locality? And there's a huge requirement, I think, for us to think beyond the Ofsted framework. And I say that because of the fact that there is really the danger that success is continuing to be judged under the criteria of long success rates and teaching and learning quality, clearly, but not necessarily asking what is it we are doing in our communities and how are we actually changing the opportunities and the attitudes of our students to move forward. And my proposition to you today is that that is a legitimate strategic role for a governing body. That governing bodies have a legitimate role in questioning the quality not just of traditional pedagogy, but actually the impact of what that teaching and learning is doing at community level. And the question, and I'm not going to answer it in the 10 or 15 minutes we have today, but the question is, what does entrepreneurial governance look like? I mean, Drucker makes a really interesting quote when he talks about the situation in America, where he talks about in the public sector, we have 10 million people employed to spend money, but nobody to make it. And I think there's a huge issue around what does entrepreneurial governance look like? Do we need boards who can actually create resources, who can actually do more with less? I mean, we heard a Dick Palmer a short time ago talk about actually realising £1.7 million of resource savings to reinvest in student experience. Where does that sit in the Ofsted leadership framework as an outstanding piece of leadership? Where do we measure that sort of improvement? And I think unless we start to look at that sort of output, then there's a danger we could feel we're doing a really good job and have the Ofsted come in and say to us, that's terrific, your long success rates are 92 or whatever they are, and somehow that's enough. Well, I know from the conversations here that it isn't. And when we start to look at what an entrepreneurial college might look like, I'm going to offer you a very small clip here, colleagues, that's very short, but I just want to give you an introduction to it because I think it's the core of what I want to say today, which is that when we set up across 16 colleges a social enterprise project to design some underpants for the Olympics, to sell them and the winners to go to see those pants being sourced in India, having won the competition in terms of both design and money, we did it because we think the sort of learning that happens and the sort of opportunity that occurs is something we all need to look at, and I'd commend it to you. Sorry, is that going to come in next or next one on? So that the focus really of the Gazelle Colleges group is to move from the standard skills and knowledge output to saying that we have a duty and a responsibility to create employment as well as provide for it. So that our staff continue not to simply say we are preparing people for jobs that may or may not exist, but rather we can create employment from within our organisations and increasingly look to targets of how many students we employ directly in our organisations to assist them with their economic circumstances. I think we have to take risks with pedagogy, and by that I mean, and this is what I would commend to you, I mean, to what extent and how fast are you flipping the classroom, for want of a better word, in your organisations? Can you afford to absolutely ignore the technological implications around the changing nature of how people learn in our organisations? And by that I mean we can take significantly more resources to support students into employment, into an entrepreneurial mindset, by actually facing up to the fact that we no longer need traditional pedagogy at the level and the balance that we've needed in the past. And I would suggest to the boards of corporation that if you don't have a clear view of your technology strategy and its impact on creating more value for students, then I think that's a strategic question that you might want to take away. We're about breaking down those curriculum silos, about actually saying really that it's no longer acceptable for students to be shepherded into a marketing course, a business course, a catering course or whatever, when the stuff of entrepreneurship is about collaboration, it's about learning to work together, and therefore the whole view that the corporation might take is to what extent are we breaking down those artificial barriers, and to what extent are we bringing students together to actually experience and develop a very different set of skills. And more importantly, colleagues, in our own thought leadership, both at the executive and the governance level, what sort of investment is being made to enable us to be more entrepreneurial in our leadership? I certainly feel I need that, because there's an increasing requirement, I think, to reduce dependency on public funding and to move forward to generate resources more directly. And I don't think our leadership courses in the past have necessarily been geared towards helping us to do those things.
Essentially for me, one of the things that I got from the project, if I could sum it all up in one word, is empowerment. And the reason I say that is because it wasn't something that was handed to me, it was something that I had to attain. And all the situations that were presented to me, whether it be selling a pair of underpants, designing a pair of underpants, going to India and speak to people who couldn't speak English, those were situations where I had to overcome. And because I was successful in overcoming those obstacles, the situations, whichever, I felt empowered. So the biggest thing that it's done for me is empowered me. And after all of that, I could look back on that and go, wow, I did that. Maybe I could do more, and which I'm going to do, you know what I mean? I feel empowered to take my ideas, the things that I have, and run with them now, you know what I mean? I've got my entrepreneurial flag, and I'm just going to run with it.
Colleagues, I showed you that because I think it says something about the nature of that experience. And our challenge, I think, as board members, as principals and others, is to say, are we really creating that applied experiential learning in our organisation which produces the testimony of that young man? Would he have made the same testimony if he'd simply been doing a traditional course in our colleges? I don't think so. And therefore, I think that we need to just, in terms of the challenge and risk side, is the real costs, I would suggest, for us are contained in innovation, technology and growth. And the big challenge to me and to my corporation is really, are we in danger of actually thinking we can do this on our own as an institution? Is there a responsibility for us to collaborate? Is there, as we've done in the group of colleges, the Gazelle colleges, that's 20 colleges sharing an investment in social enterprise, in entrepreneurial thinking, in student engagement, in taking students to different places and so on. Why? Because there's no way I could do it within my own resource base. So the challenges that I came to really present to you today are really around, are we really thinking outside the traditional paradigms? Do we really need to start to debate and to think what a truly entrepreneurial culture feels and looks like, that can add greater value to our community, that can do more with the resources we've got, and that we can measure that and celebrate it in a range of different ways. I'd finish by saying basically that entrepreneurship is now the #1 priority in the European Commission's recent education policy document. Why is that the case, colleagues? It's the case because, in case we haven't realised it, our students, particularly the young people, the 2.5 million that cost $7.5 billion of public funds each year in our colleges are not going to emerge into employment in any serious way in large numbers going forward in this immediate future. Therefore, their only future is to create their own wealth, to create their own confidence, and to create their own employment in much larger numbers than they've ever had to do before. Therefore, the challenge for us and our corporations, I think, is to say, how do we make that happen? What are we doing with our curriculum? How are we making those changes occur? Because we want to measure as a board of corporation, both not startup, but really entrepreneurial confidence. That means our students can go and create employment, can add value to SMEs, and I would challenge us to say that if we continue to do what we've always done, then we certainly won't be getting that outcome. And therefore, the definition of what is successful in governance, my challenge would be that we need new levels of accountability for what we do with those resources and what the impact is. Thank you very much.
You up for a couple of questions? I know Fintan's against the clock, but he's up for a couple of questions if there are such in the audience. Please just indicate if you'd like to question. Yes, sir.
I was with you right up until the guy said he took his designs out to India to be manufactured. I think you undermined your own argument by not leaving that manufacturing in this country. We exported the taxpayers' pound out of the country. We have to bring it into the country.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Table at the front here, please.
Agree with all you're saying, Fintan. Do you want to just quickly give 2 or 3 characteristics of what would be more entrepreneurial governance? Richard Dibbleyama, else is concerned.
Yeah, I think that what I think entrepreneurial governance might look like is that we would need to practice. This is something I've learned very recently from work with Babson College in the US and that, which is the #1 college for entrepreneurial education in the US, is I learned that actually what they do is they actually see entrepreneurial activity and entrepreneurial leadership as a practice rather than something that is taught. So I think we have to get used ourselves and our students to creating the learning in our organisations that allows people to practice being entrepreneurial, to learn by mistakes, to be working in real organisations. So for us, for example, we're looking very much, and you'll have seen that in the Richard Review, you'll have seen it in the UKCS Review, looking at the whole identification and development of learning companies within colleges, where colleges themselves create that employment. And being entrepreneurial to me is about actually taking commercial learning forward, enabling the students to do what they can't do at the moment, which is to be employed, and therefore governance really exploring together how we might actually scale that in a way through sharing and collaboration, and probably also recognizing that the nature of putting students into real experiences of the type we've just described, social enterprise, accelerates their learning dramatically and actually improves their confidence to be enterprising. So maybe it's starting to look at those things.
Fintan, thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you.
Can we put
Thank
our
you
hands together? Great to see you.